We know that being a geek isn't just a hobby, it's a lifestyle. Join us as we invite special guests to share their love for the characters and worlds that shaped them. Are you ready? It's time to let your geek side show.
We sit down with artist Glen McIntosh, an animator and animation supervisor at Industrial Lights and Magic. His resume is filled with some of the biggest hits of the silver screen, including E.T., Ready Player One, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and more. Let's listen in on what he has to say.
We have film and animation legend Glen McIntosh in the house.
Legend?
Oh, legend for sure.
Oh, yeah.
It's so great to have you here.
It's so great to be here. It's a real
you
honor.
definitely qualify for legend status. You've got more than 2 decades of experience doing art and animation for an incredible amount of movies. I'm going to read off the list because I can't even. It's amazing. E.T., the Star Wars prequels. We're going to have to talk some General Grievous. Yep. Ang Lee's Hulk. I love that movie. Deep Blue Sea, Lone Survivor, Super 8, Eragon, Transformers, Ready Player One, and of course, the Jurassic Park series.
Yes.
We'll save the best for last in the interview because I think there's some major dino geeks here at Sideshow and we had to scale back the questions for that. But for our audience, please start submitting some questions now in chat.
You can't over dino geek on me. That's
we will put that to the test.
Yeah.
But let's start and reel all the way back to the start of your career. How did you get into art and animation?
Well, I've always my parents took me to see Jaws when I was 6. Which was probably a bit too young.
Yeah, that's
because I've never been in the ocean since. But it also gave me a love of film. And then in the same year, Bambi was released, and I went and saw that. And Talking Deer wasn't as cool as a killer shark, but it made me appreciate the animation and the amount of effort and artistry that went into creating a bunch of drawings that move like a realistic deer, and then you care about these animals. And so I was always drawing, and I loved Ray Harryhausen as well. So Seventh Voyage of Sinbad would come out and re-release, and so I'd draw the Cyclops. And so I noticed that there was a love of drawing and a love of film, and the natural combination seemed to be animation. And so I was, as I loved movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Star Wars films, I noticed that there was just these movies that I would sort of gravitate towards, and then I would see remakes of them, and I would go and see those because I love Jaws and Raiders so much. And then I would see these other movies that were sort of trying to do what those movies did, whether it was Star Wars or Raiders, and they weren't quite as good, and I couldn't figure out why. And I would sort of came around to the idea that, well, it's who's making the movies. It's Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And so I would sort of gravitate towards the work that they did. And then from their work, I would learn to study other directors like Ridley Scott. I remember seeing Blade Runner when I was 13. And it was one of the first movies I saw where it wasn't just entertaining me. It was telling me something about the human experience. And so, I came out of that movie thinking, wow, movies can do more than just entertain you. And then, of course, I discovered Stanley Kubrick and The Shining, which I also saw way too young. And it was the scariest movie ever. And I was wondering, well, why is it scary? Why is it scaring me? And it was sort of the camera work, the music, everything working together to do something that's atypical of what a horror movie would do. Instead of everything being dark, everything was these brightly lit hotel interiors, and yet it's still
right?
that carpeting, and the way the camera would follow the little boy, and then the little boy would gain on the camera and go around the corner, but the camera would keep on continuing. Mm-hmm. So now the camera is a character. It's you get the impression that it's something that's following him, and you don't know what. So there's the intentional moves that are being done, with the camera, with the choreography, that are all go to help make it a scarier movie, but also help tell the story. And so I was always fascinated by that. So when I went to University of Calgary, I studied film, ended up giving lectures in film at the University of Calgary, and then discovered the Sheridan College of Character Animation, Classical Character Animation in Oakville, Ontario. And so I was reading off the classes, and it was everything I loved. It was layout, camera work, history of animation,
You couldn't pick.
Yeah, everything was fantastic. And so and to go to film school there was an incredible experience. And you meet amazing people. I met Dean DeBlois, who I'm still great friends with to this day, who wrote and directed the How to Train Your Dragon films. And How to Train Your Dragon 3 comes out in the spring, and it's just absolutely incredible.
The creature design is amazing.
Oh yeah, it's so well done. And so to see that evolution and to sort of meet these people that you knew were going to make a big impact in the entertainment industry was always fun. And so we've always kept in touch. And then from there, I was able to work at Don Bluth Studios in Dublin, Ireland for 3 years. I was going to be a storyboard
How did
artist.
you go from Canada to Ireland?
Well, it's so interesting in that, back in the day, and I sound like an old timer now, but back in the day when you came out of Sheridan College, you put your portfolio under your arm, you just started knocking on doors and talking to people and sending out your portfolio. Nowadays, with the CG schools, the Walt Disney Company, the Warner Brothers, DreamWorks, they come to the schools and to see the work of the students. Back in the day, it was more like you had to go out and find the work. And Sheridan geared you to getting work in the industry. And so I was prepared in that sense, but I was just sort of wanted to get in the industry to sort of like learn as much as I could.
So you decided to go knock on doors in Ireland?
Well, yeah, I loved the style of animation. Like The Secret of Nim, I thought was beautifully done, and American Tail, and so again, American Tail produced by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and Land Before Time, I should say, and then American Tail is produced by Steven Spielberg. So my fascination with them, my fascination with animation, and it's like, oh, what they're doing an animated movie. Who did that? So that was where I had the opportunity to go there, and they weren't hiring animators at the time. They were only hiring key cleanup artists, and I didn't even know what that was. But you take the animator's rough drawing and you put it on model, and so they gave me a test where I had to do 5 drawings in 3 hours, and luckily they picked me, and I got in and
Is that the
started
longest,
doing.
like 5 hours of your life?
No, it flew by because I kept looking at my watch and like thinking, oh no, I'm not going to get them done in time. And then at night I would practice and work on my own animation because they had a camera stand and they had all this punched animation paper. So you were only limited by your imagination. So I would stay late each night and work on animation.
Wow.
And I got Don Bluth on a Saturday when he was in a good mood, and I showed him my reel, and he's like, "What do you do?" And I go, "I'm a key cleanup artist." And he's like, "Oh, you should be animating." And so I was like, so it was I lucked out there, but it was like a process of learning from Don Bluth, learning from Gary Goldman, and the directing animators there to sort of learn the fundamentals of keyframe animation, which I then applied to when I ultimately moved to Industrial Light and Magic. So
let's get to that in a second. But what were some of the early projects that you worked on? Any student films or anything?
I remember Dean and I were at Animation Mentor, and we were at the graduation ceremony. We were looking at the reels of the students, and we just sort of looked at each other and whispered, like, we would never show our student work because the work being done now by the students is of such an exceptional caliber and so far beyond what we were doing that
Is that really because technology has advanced so much, though? I
think, technology has advanced, but I think that there's so much more available to the students to learn from. There's so much material that they can look at. And I know that one of the things that I tried to do was look at a great piece of acting and break it down and then potentially apply that to an animated character. And I've seen a lot of the animation students do that. And the animation programs let them sort of concentrate on just the animation instead of maybe sound or editing or something that maybe they're not as interested in. But if they really just want to focus on being a great character animator like Pixar or DreamWorks or whatever, they can do that. And what's amazing and what's sort of helped, and to your point about the technology, what's sort of helped level the playing field is that you were always limited as a character animator by how great a draftsperson you were. Meaning that if you wanted to make Beast or Belle or whatever, like act in a certain way, Glen Keane is such an incredible draftsperson that he could animate Belle or Beast from any angle. So but in order to make that performance feel real, you have to be able to draw that character from every angle. You don't have to worry about that in CG. In CG, you have this 3-dimensional puppet that you're manipulating in space. You don't have to worry about feeling dimensional. So now you're only limited by the performance you want to give it. So whether you want to do something very subtle or something very over the top, that option is now up to you. So in that sense, it has opened things up for artists to sort of make
different set of constraints.
And it still requires like a fundamental knowledge of the basics of animation, but it's a different way of thinking. And also with doing CG animation, you have to be mindful of all the departments that are downstream from you. So whereas a drawing you could cheat from a certain angle because you're only worried about what the camera sees. With CG, you have to make sure that nothing is penetrating and nothing is sinking into the ground. Because there's going to be...
like how it fits in the environment.
Yeah, there's going to be people that are going to be figuring out the shadows. There's going to be a muscle sim that's going to be assigned if it's a dinosaur. There's going to be skin simulations. There's going to be, like if it's a furry character, there's going to be fur sim applied to it. And if the model is broken, that could affect the fur sim. So it's you have to make sure as much as possible that your character looks great from every angle. And of course, the advantage of that is if the director loves that animation, you can then reuse it and rotate it around and use it from another angle, which we did a lot on the Jurassic films.
Awesome. So. Amazing toys in the toy box there. 3D.
Oh, yeah.
So you've mentioned Spielberg and Lucas, and obviously ILM, or Industrial Light and Magic, is a special effects studio that was started by Lucas, and you've mentioned that these were huge creative influences in your work, in your career. Is that what brought you to ILM? What was your road to working at that studio?
That was just, at that point, it was the special editions had come out, and so... after Jurassic Park, George had, realized that the technology was there for him to realize what the prequels could be, and so he experimented on that with the special edition films. And so when that was coming out when I was in Phoenix, when I was working at Fox Animation, I saw the potential of what was going to happen, and so I had applied to Industrial Light and Magic. To work on Phantom Menace, and luckily I got the opportunity to do that. So
Awesome.
That was like trying to jump on a speeding train going 100 miles an hour, just because literally not knowing how to turn a computer on. Like I was that much of a dullard, where I knew how to do the drawing part, but I had never worked in a computer. So, and luckily they had a training department that trained you up on how to use it. So, so I was in training for a few months, and then about 3 months, and then right on to Phantom Menace.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Well, tell us some more about your work on the prequels. You were telling me some cool stories out in the hallway about General Grievous, who's a favorite character of mine, and a lot of people here too. I mean, he's just an amazing villain, but obviously really complicated anatomy. What was some of the inspirations behind animating that character? Well,
the only character that I could think of that I had seen that had multiple arms and sword fights is Kali from the Golden Voyage of Sinbad. So I had that tape up, and I would do poses. I would pause it and then do drawings based on what Kali was doing before she would fight Sinbad and the other sailors. So. She's very presentational as her swords come out, and then she goes into different poses. And I thought that would be a great starting point. And it would also sort of pay homage to Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah.
So before we even started on the sequence, I was the sequence supervisor on that fight. Mm-hmm. I had an opportunity to meet George after animation dailies, and I had done all these drawings, and I just spread them out all over this table. And just said, before we get started with the animation and discovering, the character and getting the movement in front of you, just want to get an idea from you, like what poses do you like, what poses do you not like, so we can start to find the character. And George would be like, oh, cool. Yeah, I like this one. Yeah, I'm not as crazy about that one. Yeah, that one's cool. And so, you realize very quickly, you step outside yourself every once in a while. And that was in a moment where I stepped outside myself, and I'm like, wow, I'm discussing a Star Wars villain with George Lucas. I always wanted to get into the industry because of him, and now we're discussing a Star Wars villain. So it was very cool. The Grievous was very much inspired by Kali, and then it would be like different ways of fighting. Like, how do you take advantage of the fact that he's a cyborg? And so it was George's idea to have all of a sudden the lightsabers start spinning like helicopter blades. And how would you fight against something like that? So it was a lot of fun to sort of get his input as we were discovering the character.
Like you said, he's a cyborg with like a robot face, which is obviously a very difficult thing to animate when you want to have a character like that emote. What were some of the tricks that you use, some of the influences to really bring that character and his
what's interesting is that he has this bony carapace, like sort of helmet, and he doesn't have a mouth. But I got a chance to...
kind of some vents, right?
Yeah, just vents down at the bottom. And he's kind of the precursor to Darth Vader. He's like an early, like proto Darth Vader. But he has eyes, and he had these amazing crocodile-like pupils. And so even though he didn't have a mouth, we had controllers for the skin underneath the eye. So I animated it like he did have a mouth. So when you see the scene, you actually see the skin under the eye moving to give the impression that he's supposed to be saying what he's supposed to be saying. And then just when he's getting ready to start fighting Obi-Wan, I added a little like eye twitch. And if you've ever seen Clint Eastwood in Outlaw Josie Wales, before he starts going nuts and shooting everyone, he has that classic Clint Eastwood eye twitch, squint. And so I put that in there, and George recognized it and liked it. So it's always like a fine line when you're creating a performance, if you go too over the top or too subtle. And I know that we would always like fight for ideas to go into the films, and one of the animators, Sean Kelly, had animated Yoda throwing his lightsaber into the stormtrooper and then leaping up on top of him and pulling the lightsaber out. And I showed it to George, and he was like, And I was like, "What are you concerned about?"
Good or bad hum?
Well, he was just like he was just
Lucas
contemplating it. Yeah,
he
was just thinking about it, because you're in service of the director. You're trying to bring his vision to the screen, and you want to make sure that it's consistent with what he has in mind. And I said, "Is it too violent for what a Jedi would do?" And he goes, "Oh, I have no problem with Yoda being a cold-blooded killer." He says, "I just don't think Yoda would ever, like a Jedi would ever let go of his lightsaber." And I was like, "Well, but Darth did in Return of the Jedi when he threw it at Luke to collapse the transom." And he was like, "Oh yeah, we're fine."
Okay.
You know, so if there was something that they had sort of created a foundation for in the original films, he was fine with it. But there was always this logic that he followed that we wanted to make sure we were consistent with. So.
It's amazing to be able to contribute to that too,
and it was
pull from the canon to add to the canon.
Yeah, and it was just like Sean came up with this great idea, and we presented it, and he went for it, you know. But it was just, that's one of those, you're surrounded by like incredibly talented artists, and then you get a chance to see what they bring to the table. And what was great about George was, he'd always reserved the right to like veto an idea, but he was absolutely open to the idea of exploring what the characters could do at different times.
That's amazing. So. Oh, speaking of other Star Wars experiences, you worked on the Star Tours project.
I did,
well,
yeah.
Right?
Yes, the revamped one, not the latest revamped one, but the one where it sort of did the major overhaul a few years ago.
I have to admit, I've never been on either. I've only been to Disneyland once, and it was just a couple months ago. Brie, have you ever been on that ride?
Yeah. Oh, I love that ride.
Oh, great.
Do you have a favorite part on it?
Oh, I don't know if I've been on the revamped one, but I always remember C-3PO coming on, like, in the beginning. I don't know if he comes on, but I know he comes on at the end, and he's like, "Is everyone okay?" Like, you can hear him talking, like, throughout the ride.
Yeah.
He's just like, "We're getting there." And then when they go into, I don't remember the name of them, but when they go, like, underground, sort of, and they're, like, flying through the structures. Yeah, I love that ride.
It was really fun to do, and I was really concerned when I got the gig because I get motion sick. I was
really?
"Oh no, I'm gonna have to go in this test motion simulator, and I'm gonna be sick for 2 years." But what was interesting, and what I learned so much from the Disney Imagineers, is that we would have objects that would come into frame and lead your eye to the next thing. So if it was on Hoth, the snow speeder would come in and be flying maybe 20 or 30 feet in front of the cab, and so your eye tends to focus on that. So the background could be doing this, but you're essentially focusing on the snow speeder. Then it would leave, and then now we're looking at something else. So you're constantly guiding the viewer's eye. So if you don't have that, they tend to kind of look everywhere at the same time, and you tend to get more motion sick. So that's something that's done by design. So on like the Wookiee planet,
the whole medium kind of unto itself, right?
Like we'll have like a bird fly into frame and then leave again, and then a stormtrooper on a speeder would come in and he'd leave frame, and so it constantly like working against it. And what I was always thinking of in terms of cinema is breaking the plane of the sort of the flat of the aspect ratio of like the film image that you look at. So I'm always sort of looking to create angles across the frame instead of making everything parallel to the frame.
And why is that?
Well, just because it's more visually dynamic. But
it just feels more fantastical.
And you get to start where everything's parallel, and it starts to feel boring. But I wanted to sort of recreate the end of Empire Strikes Back, and I was working with Bill George, who is an amazing visual effects supervisor. He was like one of the top model makers, and he won an Oscar for Inner Space. And so he was very mindful of like how he was supervising the ride. And so I was saying, like the end of Empire, it has the galaxy at an angle, the spiral galaxy that Luke and Leia look at the end of the movie. And so the cabin has to reset, and the cabin has to reset. When it resets, it has to be level. And so when we showed that to the Imagineers, they were like, you can't do that because you're showing the viewer that the whole cab is this, but the cab meanwhile is level. So your eye
break the fantasy.
There's a difference in not only that, there's a difference between like the inner ear and what the eye sees. So we had to make the galaxy parallel to the frame, because if you're showing something from what the eye sees different than how the body feels, just as far as your inner ear, that's where the
level right in your head.
That's where the motion sickness starts. So it was wiring your brain to think differently instead of just pure cinema, but like the fact that you're interacting with this ride and moving through this environment that made it so. Yeah, it was. They're not just incredible artists. They're like scientists, and they have this amazing knowledge of how long someone can sustain themselves on a ride, how long you can wait in line, how they entertain you along the way. You'll notice all these
delicate science.
Oh yeah, there's all these amazing things they have along the way to make sure that you're constantly entertained as you're going through the ride.
You're giving Disney fanatic viewers everywhere fodder for the next Disney trip.
I hope so. So so I even got to be in the ride where I'm one of the like a B-wing pilot that waves hello as everyone arrives.
Yeah,
so
you were in the ride?
So when you arrive on the calamari cruiser and you land, and all of the rebels come out and welcome everyone.
Awesome.
So everyone who worked on the show got to be extras, and so they go into the archives and they pull out the costumes for everyone. Yeah, that was another one of the pluses of working at Lucasfilm, is that you get to be an extra. So in the Star Wars films, you get to be extras doing various things. So in Revenge of the Sith, I got to be the Jedi that dies. So
what?
So in the as the stormtroopers are attacking the Jedi, the big temple, there's a down view, and you see like I'm the worst Jedi ever, because like there's a stormtrooper.
Realize we're all gonna go back and look this up as soon as we leave this room.
I don't even know what that Jedi's called. I've asked, but I figured all of them have a name. But even he doesn't have a name. But there's like a stormtrooper 2 feet behind me that shoots me in the back, and I fall down and roll over. And so I had to get outfitted for my Jedi costume. And they said, well, you're going to be handling a lightsaber, so you're going to have to practice handling a lightsaber before you shoot your scene. And one of the guys, they were like, right? I think he's been practicing for this since he was 8. He's fine. He's got it. So then I asked them to put like a wooden, like an actual blade in.
Wow.
And then they were afraid, of course, that I was such a klutz, I would like fall on it and impale myself. And so then
so
then as I died, they're like, just throw it. So like I chucked it as I fell down, and then as I throw it, from out of the edge of the camera view, I hear this like cameraman, hey Olivier, tone down your throws there, just take it easy,
Were you like, can I get a Wilhelm scream?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you get to keep your Jedi costume?
No, I wish. They all go back to the archives. So, but I'm hopeful that with the museum that George is going to be opening in a couple of years, that all of the incredible stuff that I got to see will be on display for everyone.
Man.
So, and it's what was really fun is when I got to go to the archives, they're like, you need to go. We need to get reference photography, and I'm like, okay, if I have to. And I needed Darth Vader's gauntlet, and they went and got Hayden Christensen's gauntlet. And I was like, would it be possible to see David Prowse's gauntlet from Empire Strikes Back?
Maybe,
and he's she's like, oh yeah, wait a second, I know where that is. And so she disappeared for 15 minutes and came out and pulled the paper apart.
The luckiest librarian in the world.
Yeah,
oh my god.
And then she said, and the idea is that Darth Vader does the Force to the cab and shakes it around. So we needed a pose with that. And she said, if you want, you could, I'll take the picture and you can put on the glove of you being in the forced pose. And I'm like, that's probably a good idea. And meanwhile, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, this is too cool.
Oh my
yeah.
God.
So it's, working at Lucasfilm was an amazing experience.
That would be so much fun. I have to ask, so what's it like to see yourself die on camera?
Well, it's the hammiest death ever. So
even better.
Yeah, but the camera passes over me very quickly. But it was these like specific beats that I had to hit because the camera, it has to sort of capture everything as it's moving. So on like 1001, I get shot. 1002, I wince. 1003, I fall down on my knees. 1004. So there were specific beats that I was trying to keep track of in my head, and so that it was tricky to do, but it was a lot of fun too. So.
Oh my God. If I were you, I'd have that like all over my face all the time. It would just be like my perpetual like profile photos. Be like,
when everyone sees it, they're like,
time when
nice dying scene, Glenn. So yeah, not the best, but it was.
You need some custom GIFs made so you can just respond to things in text with that. It just wilting.
Yeah. So it was fun.
So I have to switch gears a little bit because this film is, I think personally, I love this film and it's very underrated. The War of the Worlds, the Tom Cruise, the remake is, I think, amazing. And the special effects in that are just incredible. I mean, the tripods, the aliens, the way the whole world gets overgrown with that creepy red, hairy, veiny stuff. And I know you worked on that project, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
What was interesting about War of the Worlds is that typically, like for Jurassic World, I was on that project for 2.5 years. War of the Worlds was the exact opposite. Everything had to be done in 3 months.
That's insane with the amount of
really,
like, special effects that are in that movie, too.
Yeah, and an incredibly short post-production schedule. But the advantage of that is you've got Steven Spielberg as the director. And so here's a director who knows exactly what he wants. He has the imagery figured out even before the choreography, the composition of the shot. Dennis Muren was the visual effects supervisor. He's won 9 Academy Awards, and I've had a chance to work with him on the Jurassic films. Randy Dutra was the animation supervisor who did the stop motion animation for the original Jurassic Park. So you're talking about the best, the top visual effects artists in the world working on this project, and so that's how they're able to do it with a schedule like that. And then what I thought was so interesting is that if you go back and watch the movie, most of the shots of the tripod are from the point of view of the street level, and
they're terrifying.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it's sort of a science fiction movie in a post 9/11 world, and without specifically addressing it, I know that it's the imagery is supposed to be evocative of that when you see like the dust clouds in the street, and I think that's what makes it so horrific is that it feels so real, and it feels what people saw on the TV that just made it so horrific. And so I think Steven tapped into something of that with the type of imagery he was going for, very sort of like capturing the event, capturing the moment, not trying to linger on something overly cinematic, but just sort of like, wow, something horrible just happened and the cameraman almost doesn't know what to capture. So
being
that
right with the family like that. Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way, but
and that was sort of the approach. And then the approach to the tripods is so tricky because there's really nothing in nature that moves that way. So it was trying to come up with a type of walk cycle that you don't see. Nature just doesn't really on our planet anyway.
3 legs in nature.
Yeah, you can't really. I can't really think of any. I know that in the deep ocean they've discovered what's called a tripod fish.
Really?
Yeah. So it has it's a fish that rests on the bottom of the ocean. It has these elongated pectoral fins, and it literally sits like a camera stand. So like nature is more amazing than we can imagine. But so trying to come up with movement for the tripods was very tricky. But it was you'll notice that the aliens are sort of shaped like the tripods themselves. So animating them was making sure that they were creepy and very sort of peekaboo as well. Like in the basement scene,
oh god,
you're not getting
sort of
too
like
good a look at
tentacle,
them. Yeah,
the big red eye. It was really, and like you said, I think with the animation, the motion, you really kind of married. It's robotic, but it's also organic, and you kind of marry the two in a really unsettling way.
Yeah.
It's, I think, really just unique, that character design.
I agree. Yeah, no, it was, and there was a lot of beautiful art direction, like beautiful concept artwork that they would, like Dennis and Randy would be like looking at and specifically trying to sort of match that frame of this artwork, like try and sort of capture that quality that makes the artwork so stunning, and sort of do that as well with the moving image, make sure that it's as beautiful as that still image.
Well, they were definitely successful.
Oh, great.
It was a great
Glad
film.
you liked it. Yeah.
All right, we can't contain ourselves anymore. Let's talk dinosaurs. So outside of like astronaut and president of the United States, I think probably the coolest job title anywhere is lead raptor animator.
Yeah.
Which you had on your business card for a while. So please tell us about that.
Yeah, that was on Jurassic Park 3. I got to be lead raptor animator, and that was just too much fun. And Dan Taylor was the animation supervisor, and got a chance to work with Tom St. Amand, and Tom St. Amand, who I've always admired, did all the stop motion animation for a lot of the earlier Industrial Light and Magic films. So the coal car chase from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, all of those stop motion puppets was animated by Tom getting into this tunnel of spray painted styrofoam and manipulating these little 1/6 scale puppets, and he was animating dinosaurs. And so getting a chance to work with him was amazing. And then
did you learn any special tricks or insights from him?
Well, it was always interesting to hear how much more difficult it was back then. Like if you went and did a take where you had the Indy puppet and the Willy puppet and the short round puppet, and then you would look at dailies the next day, and Indy was doing what you wanted, but Willy wasn't. It's like, okay, well, let's reanimate it and have Willy react back as the coal car tips over. Okay. But because they're puppets, not everything's going to be exactly the same way the next time. So the next day, Willy looked great, but now Indy wasn't doing exactly what you wanted. Whereas
sounds
now,
very frustrating.
Yeah, it was super frustrating, and you have to have so much patience with stop motion animation. And the work that Leica Studios does with like Coraline and Kubo is just stunning. And so, but you nowadays we do have the opportunity to make everything exactly the way we want it. So it's much easier now. But it was interesting to hear his stories about it. But for the raptors, it was essentially studying birds, just going and looking at herons, like the way they'll like stalk like a rat or a squirrel, or eat a frog. Like they're really nasty birds, the way they like essentially stab their victims and then swallow them while they're still alive. And how they'll pause for a moment, and then their body will come forward as their head comes back.
Like a snake before it strikes.
Just before, and then they attack. And so it was just getting an understanding of that timing that was really important. And then of course looking at ostriches, because ostriches are the fastest living bipeds on the planet. So you have like cheetahs that can get up to around 60, 65 miles an hour, and ostriches can get up to around 45 miles an hour. All our raptors in Jurassic Park 3 had to be running that fast. We didn't really see them running for a sustained number of shots until Jurassic World, but there were some shots in Jurassic Park 3 where they had to be racing through the jungle to catch up to the group. And so ostriches are perfect because they're roughly the right size, and they're taking steps the way a raptor would have.
Like kind of stalking and flock behavior.
Yeah, and then on top of that, you'd have like the tail whipping back and forth, and it's our tails were a little bit flatter, whereas a raptor's tail in real life was a little bit more higher. And
you have an interesting point too, because there's an art and a science to dinosaurs.
Yes.
Right? And it's
Very
always
much.
Constantly changing as they discover new stuff. How much did that come into play with your work on the Jurassic films?
So we're always beheld to sort of the history of the Jurassic films, like from a design point of view. But then for like Jurassic World, we're always making sure, like Colin even put that line in where Dr. Wu says, we're using DNA from frogs, and these aren't necessarily the dinosaurs that they were. They're what we imagine them to be. They're what we want them to be. But it was always sort of, that line was done to sort of our get out of jail free card, to say that these dinosaurs are being infused with various types of like iguana DNA or cuttlefish DNA or whatever. So that's why they didn't have feathers.
Wiggle room there.
Yeah, it's a little bit of wiggle room there. But as much as possible, we're always trying to make sure that we're informed by Mother Nature. And the idea behind that is, aside from the birds we see every day, no one's ever seen a dinosaur. But we've all gone to the zoo and we've all gone to watch those amazing BBC documentaries.
David Attenborough.
Right. Yeah, it's just like stunning imagery. And there's incredible reference to be taken from that. But we've all gone to the zoo and we've seen rhinos and elephants. And you have an innate feeling for how these animals move. Mm-hmm. So we would, if it's like a sauropod, we would match the movement of an elephant. Whether it's like the brachiosaurs or the
sure, the big shoulders and kind of lumbering.
Well, they're four-legged, and then essentially you got the long neck and the long tail, but the body is essentially that of an elephant. It's very close. And then for our mid-sized dinosaurs, like our ceratopsians, like Triceratops, or you'd have like the ankylosaurs, we would look at a rhino, because a rhino is like 2 to 3 tons. It's got really big, thick, heavy head, and it's even got head ornamentation like a Triceratops. And we would use that to help define the personality and the character, and let that be the foundation of those animals. Meaning that if you've seen an action that feels familiar to you, even though it's a creature of fantasy, it feels real because it reminds you of something that you've seen at a zoo or on a BBC documentary.
That's cool. Kind of base it on that sort of genuine. I've heard writers talk that way before, like even writers of fiction, like they base everything off of a real world event, so everything feels believable. This is sort of that analog then in animation. Like if you find something in the natural world and you kind of match it. Yeah,
for sure. And the result of that was like for Jurassic World was like twofold, where we're not only getting the animators used to a style of animation which is a little bit more realistic and something maybe a little less cartoony and stylized, but we're able to create a huge library of movement. And so you're not only training up the animators and getting them, they're coming up with these like amazing ideas because you're asking them to like go find some reference that you think looks cool, and they would come back with incredible things that you would never imagine. But they had assigned the movements of an elephant and onto these like various animals, and you would get these really cool movements. And the director would, Colin Trevorrow would like recognize that, like that's that rhino getting up out of the mud. Could we put that into the scene where the kids enter the valley? And yeah, sure,
Get to do a little Island of Dr. Moreau or all together.
Well, and it also goes back to what I was saying as far as like making sure that the animation looks great from every angle, because the director might say that looks fantastic, but I want the animation to be spun around where we're looking at its tail instead of its head, or and if you've cheated it, then it's going to goof you up. But if you've animated it correctly from every angle, it's going to just drop right into the shot and look great.
So you've been doing some lectures recently. Is this sort of some of the material you've been covering at different museums and universities where you've been talking?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to work to give a couple of lectures at the U of C Berkeley. Sarah El-Shafi was very polite and asked me to come and give a talk to the paleontologists there.
Awesome.
And I had the opportunity to speak at the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology up in Drumheller, Canada, to around 200 people.
Cool.
And the fossil collections at both places is just amazing.
I'm jealous. I want to go.
And then I had a chance to give a talk on character design because I helped design the Indominus Rex for and as well as dinosaur movement at the View conference in Torino, Italy in October. So
nice.
It's been a lot of fun to go to these different places and talk about the dinosaur movement. And what I found is that I thought the paleontologists would be mad at me. Just because there's certain liberties, there's certain cinematic conceits that have to be made. But scientists embrace that because they're always asking questions, and they're learning something all the time about dinosaurs. In 20 years from Jurassic Park to Jurassic World, like the idea that now we know that Dromaeosaurus had feathers. That's a known. And so, but there's always like things that you do in the movie that, you might have to like adjust, and the scientists understand that. Like I know that for Jurassic World, we had our mosasaur, our big, our big underwater reptile. It was, they grew to around 40 or 50 feet long. It's like gigantic. but maybe not cinematic enough. And I know that like Colin and Stephen wanted to make sure that it was cinematic, and so we kept sort of scaling it up. And the not only did mosasaurs like had incredible like teeth, but they had teeth on the inside of their mouths as well, on the roof of their mouths.
Oh, like a shark, right? Kind of
just like up on like on the roof of their mouth, they had an extra set of teeth. So when they would bite down on something, like there's no way it was getting away. But of course, because they're marine reptiles and not dinosaurs, they also had forked tongues. And we know they had forked tongues because there's a notch called the Jacobson's organ in the roof of these, in the roof of the fossils that you can see in modern like rattlesnakes or monitor lizards. And essentially, when they're sticking their tongue out and pulling it back in, they're plugging it into this Jacobson's organ, and they're tasting the air, and they're sending a signal to the brain like, oh, there's blood in the water, or there's blood in the air. And we know that mosasaurs had that notch, so we know that they had forked tongues. So you run into the problem of, do you put forked tongues on this animal that you've now sized up to like over 100 feet?
It'd be like a fire hose.
Yeah, and it's exactly. Not only does it feel like a fire hose, but it also runs the risk of, not many people know that, and it could potentially feel like something too much like a dragon from Game of Thrones as opposed to a dinosaur. So there's certain choices that you make sometimes as far as you want to be as scientifically accurate as possible, but you also want to make sure that it feels believable. That's the most important thing. So that was one of the ones where we went with like a regular tongue, and I think a forked tongue would have felt a little bit too dragon-like, and we tried to avoid that with Indominus as well. Like it had to be a new dinosaur, it had to be distinct from the T-Rex, it had to so when they're fighting, you could easily recognize them, eat one another, but it couldn't feel too fantasy oriented. So we were trying to make sure that we walked the fine line between fantasy and science. But what was great was that there's so many recent dinosaur discoveries that they've made in Patagonia. There's like a Carnotaurus where their entire length of their necks and along their bodies, they have these incredible osteoderms, like spiky protrusions. It's like, so you see that on the back of a crocodile. And so that was a great way to distinguish it from the T-Rex, where we had these like bony spikes running along its back.
I love the design of that creature. I mean,
it was a really fun design, and to sort of make it look just as scary as possible, giving it like a blood red eye. But of course, and that was based even off of a goshawk. So like we weren't. There was a Robert Bateman painting I had seen where it's like a gray foggy environment, and then there's this goshawk on a branch, and its eye really stood out, and I thought that would be really dramatic. And so it's everyone was doing a lot of concept artwork and getting it in front of Colin, and luckily he went ahead with the red eye, because I think it makes it distinct from the T-Rex that has the yellow eye. So.
Well, we've been showering you with our fandom, but we'd like to hear about some of your fandom. I understand that you're a collector as well.
Oh my gosh,
you have a few sideshow pieces. So what inspires our inspiration? What do you collect?
Oh my gosh. So, well, the entire Dinosauria line is just by you guys. It's just incredible.
Thank you.
Because you're so conscious of the science. And I've shown your pieces to Jack Horner. I showed him your Triceratops. And he was like, "Yeah, that's a beautiful example of a juvenile adult, like a young adult." And he thought it was fantastic. And so, but the fact that you put a lot of thought into the science as well as the movement as well as the design, I think is incredible. So I have all the Dinosauria pieces. I'm a huge fan of Predator, so of course I have the Predator sculptures, and then being a Marvel fan ever since I was a little kid. Growing up in Calgary, there was an artist named John Byrne who
I'm familiar.
He wrote. Yeah, so he wrote and drew for Fantastic Four and X-Men.
Yeah.
And I've just been a huge fan of his artwork, and so I was a huge Marvel fan. So I have all like
X-Men run.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Yeah, and so I'm a huge fan of Marvel and the Marvel films, and so
Do you have a favorite character?
I think Iron Man, just because he's gone through such a change. He's had such a great arc. Even though like Captain America is amazing as well, as far as like the first Captain America is so sad. Like at the end of that movie when he says I had a date, I was just like, oh man, I felt so bad for him. But and he's such a great contrast to Tony Stark, and so I love how they play off each other and how they're.
Did you like the Civil War stuff?
Oh, it was incredible.
That was a good.
And how they were both they both felt they were right in their own way, and
both views were empathetic. Right?
Yeah. And so the way, like, what Marvel has done with these, like in the past 10 years, and created this Marvel universe, and like what I would love to do is collect the Marvel the history, like the Marvel Encyclopedia, the Marvel Universe books. They would alphabetically list every Marvel character, and John Byrne had done the covers for the second run of that. And
the handbooks, those are great. Oh my God.
And what I thought was so amazing was how all these characters interacted in this world, and so to see them all doing that has been fantastic. To see at the end of the very first Iron Man, when you see Tony, that was just amazing when you realize that the Avengers is going to happen.
It really is a wonderful build-up.
But I can't believe the thought that's gone into planning. I can't imagine in Marvel somewhere there must be some chart plotting out, where all these where all these stories, where the plan is for all these stories and where they have to go. So that's been amazing to watch, and I think that, like, in the same way Star Wars for me was sort of what got me interested in movies, and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Jaws. There's a generation of I think when you're like 13, 14, that's sort of the age when you really gravitate towards something
seminal, impressionable age.
I think like Lord of the Rings. I think those, like, I'm a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings films, and I'm sure those are the Star Wars of the early 2000s. And I think now the Marvel films are they're the Star Wars for kids. But I'm much older and I still love those movies. So it's I'm a huge collector of all that stuff. I'm trying to fine tune my collecting, but I was like, I'm just going to stick to dinosaurs and Star Wars. I'm like, well, maybe Lord of the Rings. Well, maybe Predator. Oh, now they did Alien. I got to get that. I love aliens. So I find that every time I try and focus on one thing, it ends up, I don't have the discipline to just stick because there's so much amazing stuff that you guys create. So.
Thank you.
But right now I want to know, because I'm currently reading Eragon. And I know that you worked on that movie, so I want to know, what can you tell us about Eragon and working on dragons?
What was interesting about that was the concept of that was like a boy and his dragon was more of a like, if you've seen Top Gun, it was trying to make it cool, like if flying an F-15 is like is as cool as having your own dragon and flying in that, and so it was an interesting study in not looking too much at reference footage and taking what you can away from it, because we would look at golden eagles and they would be flapping too much, and so it was trying to sort of minimize, like sort of like making it more like an albatross. Like once it gets up to a certain height, it doesn't even have to flap its wings because it's so aerodynamic.
Yeah.
And so and sort of what would that look like, and take advantage of that. And then there was also a sequence where it was the baby dragon, Saphira, as a baby, and we looked at a lot of reference of what defines something as cute, and in Mother Nature, and
what is cute?
Yeah, what is cute? And you find that you'll see that from a rainbow trout to a puppy to a kitten. It's that their eyeballs stay the same size, but their skulls get bigger. So that's why their eyes, that's why they look so endearing, because their eyes look so big. So one of the goals with Eragon, like with Saphira as a baby, was just trying to make her as endearing and as cute as possible. And once again, looking at footage of cute animals and what defines something as cute, and the way puppies will kind of stumble, and so we would put little moments like that in where the dragon stumbles, or the way it'll sort of lean in to sniff, but then it pulls back really quick, and just finding those little moments to make it feel like a real animal. But then just find those little cute moments where you want the audience to go, "Aw." So and then when Saphira becomes an adult, she changes. She becomes a really scary, ferocious dragon that kind of knifes her way through the sky, as opposed to sort of having to exert a lot of force and flapping a lot. She's more of more of a jet fighter, the way she's so trying to get into sort of like that mode. And there's been so many incredible dragons that have been done on the big screen, and I was such a huge fan of what Phil Tippett and Dennis Muren did for a movie called Dragon Slayer, which came out in 1981. And that, for me, Vermithrax was like the coolest movie dragon ever. And what's amazing to me about it was that I had always seen the Ray Harryhausen dragons where they sort of walked on all fours.
Yeah.
But it was always stop motion animation. And I remember Clash of the Titans came out the same year as Dragon Slayer at the same time. Mm-hmm. So instead of going to see Clash of the Titans, I'd already seen it, and it was sold out. So I went and saw Dragon Slayer. And that was interesting because it was sort of a fundamental shift in how I viewed visual effects, where now it didn't, like when I would look at stop motion, it was obvious that it was an effect, but it was beautifully done. Whereas with Vermithrax, there was a conscious effort to make it feel as real as possible. And so with the Go Motion technology, there was motion blur, and there were still matte lines, but they were much, much better. And it didn't have four legs. It walked on its wings like a bat. And that type of dragon is known as a wyvern. And so, but the fact that like Phil had done all this research into how like a bat moves, and I recognized that. I was like, wow, this is moving different than anything I've ever seen before. And so Dragon Slayer was a big change for me, where I sort of recognized that the visual effects artists are really making an attempt to create something we've never seen before. Yeah. And at that time, I thought that was just like the most incredible dragon. And what's been amazing to see is like with the Hobbit films and especially Game of Thrones and the way they've done those dragons, like the animation in both those projects is so beautifully done. But they're wyverns, the same thing. They're walking on their wings, and so I think they're taking inspiration from Vermithrax, but they're just expanding on it. And the animation of Game of Thrones is just incredible. The idea that it doesn't feel like a TV show; it feels like this expansive, beautifully made movie. And the effects work is as beautiful as anything that you'd see in a feature film. So yeah, it's fun to sort of see the evolution of dragons.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
In Eragon, for everyone that doesn't know the story, there's a really strong emotional connection between Eragon and Saphira the dragon, and they can sort of speak to each other through their minds. So how do you go about in all of like the fight scenes that are in that story? What kind of thought process or steps do you take when thinking about like Saphira flying and battling and recognizing like Eragon's emotions and his thoughts and coming to his defense? Yeah,
what's tricky is like we're as much as possible, and what you really see with the How to Train Your Dragon films is Toothless can't talk. And yet you see so much expression in the eyes. And so with Saphira, the goal was to try and put as much expression in her face as possible. And Rachel Weisz was doing her voice, but was for the movie. But what was interesting was trying to make sure not to overuse the voice. Like if you can, because you can obviously, if you can get away and sell that emotion that she's concerned for Eragon or that she's getting ready to attack, then let the animation just be the character, but and then introduce dialogue when it's necessary. And I thought that they did a great job with that. So.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
this larger than life mythical creature.
Yeah,
so much concern for this little 16-year-old kid.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Fascinating. So should we go ahead and take some questions from the audience?
Sure. This is actually a great segue to our next question.
Okay.
If you could remake or reboot any movie. So speaking of dragons, are they on like a wish list for you? Are there any movies out there, given the technologies we have today, that you'd love to remake, or a character you'd like to take on?
There's probably more than a few people that would want to kill me for saying this, but I would love to redo Jaws. And by that I mean I don't want to add any more shots. I want to keep the exact same number of shots, and I want to just take the shark as it exists now and make it a true great white. And taking the exact same plate photography, and we can absolutely do that now, and just have and the thing is that Bruce the shark is so iconic, and I love that design. I'm curious to see how a modern movie-going audience would respond to it if it was like a real great white. Because there's such scary animals to begin with.
Oh my God, yeah.
There's been steps that we've been taking what's amazing is in the past 30 years, we've been able to witness the evolution of modern visual effects. And you can see how we go from like Star Wars to Jurassic Park to Avatar to Pirates of the Caribbean. And each time we're making these huge leaps. And I think the technology exists where you could do a water simulation and you could around the great white shark and you could make it move absolutely perfect. And it's one of those classics like, Gone with the Wind, Citizen Kane, Ben-Hur, Lawrence of Arabia. Like, do you want to go back in and touch something that's that perfect? It would be fun to try, but I know that Steven has said he doesn't want to do that. But I think as a fun exercise, it would be interesting because I think you could make. Because I wouldn't be interested in showing more of the shark because I think that's the success of the film. But taking the existing shots and replacing it with an absolutely photorealistic great white, I think would be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, I'm picturing in my head right now the movie. That would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Do that
but I mean, and then replacing, when it eats Quint, I wouldn't add shots or take away shots. I would just go in and we can do off of a 2D image. We can now create like a 3-dimensional environment so that where you can create simulations of the debris in the water that would be being moved around, and we could create something that would look incredibly realistic. And there's been beautiful shark animation that's been done in movies like Kon-Tiki on very limited budgets. So that would be an interesting experiment. Although it's a bit of blasphemy, I know, but I think it's one of those movies. It's my favorite movie, but I think it would be interesting to see what we could get. So
it'd be interesting to see how that would be received generationally. I don't want to put you on the spot for being younger, but one of my colleagues has some children about your age, and he's been watching some movies with them, and I think he watched Beetlejuice recently, and they just weren't into it because of all the like practical effects. They didn't really kind of get it. So I know that there's definitely nostalgia that comes into play, but I wonder if for a younger audience that has been spoiled, for lack of a better word, by like all the special effects we have now, seeing that with some of the updated effects would give them a closer connection to that film, because it really is perfect story.
I think so, yeah. And it's interesting because to your point, like with Jurassic Park, I remember when I saw that in Ireland with a lot of the animators, and when I was looking at it, now there was motion blur, now there was no matte lines at all. It was in the rain at night, like they were like throwing all of these difficult things at it, and it was so completely real, and that we were all looking at each other like, what are we looking at? Like it's a shame because younger audiences now just take it for granted that everything's going to look amazing, and 9 times out of 10 there's so many great effects houses that do great work that it can look really great. So but at the time I remember Jurassic Park was of such a level that was higher than anything we'd seen before. But I think it also speaks to Steven's genius as a director. In the same way with Jaws, you didn't see the T-Rex for the first hour. This is the way you see him when you didn't see the shark for the first hour. So it's not necessarily
storytelling definitely helps.
It's not necessarily showing more of the dinosaur, showing more of the shark, but doing it in an interesting and cinematic way, which I find so interesting. So.
I've always wanted to see, because I'm a big horror movie fan, and I can't speak for everyone my age, but but personally I've always wanted to see those classic movies that I love, at least, and I know everyone here does, and just kind of done in essentially the exact same way, but with more like modern technology. Instead of changing the storyline, just see them with the characters more fully imagined in today's capabilities. So I think that would be fascinating, especially in a movie like Jaws or Jurassic Park or all those Alfred Hitchcock films. Yeah, there's a
the Birds would be really
the Birds would be great. There's a old series on Netflix of Alfred Hitchcock's like shorts, like horror shorts. It's all in black and white, and I mean, they're terrifying, but...
Well, I know that there's footage on YouTube of starlings at dusk when they're all swirling around and flocking together, and then they all land on a tree, and the weight of them weighs the tree down, and then they all take off at the same time, and the tree flies up into the air, and it's just footage that you would never imagine like it's real, and it's just something that would look so cool in a movie. But it's
because I'm picturing them settling on a body as you're
Yeah.
saying this, you know?
yeah, right, yeah. So you can definitely take advantage of technology, and it's like what you're seeing now with I find so interesting with like the Lion King trailer, and everyone's like, oh cool, it's a live action Lion King movie. But it's really not. It's it's a beautifully animated. Yeah, it's a beautifully animated computer animation, and but it's I think even like the plate photography. I'm sure that they, in order to get some of the dynamic camera moves they're doing, that's had to be like generated from. I'm sure there's real life plate photography, and then there's LiDAR scans of valleys and jungles and. So that you can get really dynamic camera moves. So even I'm sure the jungle environments are CG. So, but you can, that many animals covered in fur.
Oh my God, I
that
can't
just
imagine.
wouldn't be possible. Like
when wind rippling through,
yeah,
it's got to be like thousands of hours of
right,
work.
exactly. Yeah, or I remember like the tentacles on Davy Jones. Like there was an initial concern that if there's this ambient wiggling movement to them, or are you going to still focus on the actor's eyes if there's all that? But what's fun with that character is that when he gets angry, the tentacles get crazier, and so the tentacles help define his personality.
His emotion.
Yeah, and so it's sort of taking advantage of his design instead of just letting them hang there. But innately, the audience still goes to the actor's eyes, and what's amazing with that is that it's Bill Nye. He's the foundation of his performance, but it's all CG. So it's not like it's even his eyes. His eyes are CG as well, but they're taking cues off of all the eye darts that he does. So all of the little tiny moments that he's creating with that performance are Bill Nighy's, but it's a completely synthetic CG creation. So yeah,
it's amazing. I mean, what blows my mind with this, aside from just the technical expertise, is the thoughtfulness behind it. Like, you've basically done an imperial study on cuteness for Eragon. You have this like bank of knowledge. Have you ever put any of that to a short of your own, or done in your own like storytelling, or a personal project that you've worked on?
I really haven't had time. That's a great question. It's the
not yet.
Not yet. I love the idea of doing that. It's just you realize how much of an investment of time and creativity is involved. Oh, yeah. But also how many experts there are in each department. We had modelers that were just experts in anatomy, and we typically build all of the animals inside out. So they're not just surface detailing their skeletons, and then on top of that we build muscles, and then on top of that we put the skin, and then you simulate the muscles, and then you simulate the skin. And so then if they had fur on top of that, then you're doing a sim on the fur. So we don't want to ever give the impression that it's just this shell that exists, but that it has volume to it, it has weight to it. And then on top of that, for the detailing on the skin or the fur, we like to give a history to it. So they might have scars, like a lot of the raptors had scratches and marks across their faces, because you don't want to make it feel like that animal only exists for the time that you now see it on the big screen. You want to feel that it had a history to it, and that it lived many years before, and it got in fights with other raptors. And so putting a lot of the environment on the animals, another way we make it feel more real, and that's sort of like another step forward in the making them feel like dust and grass or bits of mud on the feet. Or if you look at an ostrich, its feet are really dirty and cracked, its toes are cracked, and so we like its claws are all gnarly, and so we would sort of take inspiration from that and try and make it feel like something that's really like used.
It's just incredible. I mean, you just go beyond making something feel genuine. I mean, you're talking about character building and world building, and I mean, it really is like a larger design that you're bringing to these films.
Hopefully, yeah.
But this is another good point to bring in another audience question, because you've talked about how many people are involved in bringing to life just one character or one world. Who's your dream team? If you could assemble,
oh my God,
a group to work with, like who's on that list?
Well, you know what? It's anyone at Industrial Light and Magic, because they're all so talented. But
pretty amazing.
But but that being said, I've had a chance to meet so many artists from the other visual effects companies, like at Weta and Frame Store, and they're they're the scan line, you know, like so many of these companies like just do beautiful work. It's amazing to see like when you get the work back and you see like Image Engine, they do like the raptors running through the jungle, and it's getting to a point now where like the caliber of the work is of like such a high quality. But like anyone at ILM, you know, it was always so much fun to be able to work on those shows.
So you've got more people than you can count, basically, than the dream team.
What's amazing is that like you could have like for one show you could have Dennis Mirren as a supervisor, then you could have John Knoll as a supervisor, and John Knoll, you know, not only like co-created Photoshop, but he, you know, did like the train chase in Rogue One. He won the Oscar for Pirates of the Caribbean 2. He wrote Rogue One, and you know, like, so not only is he like involved in like the visual effects, but he's like very closely involved in like the actual storytelling. So he's very knowledgeable about, you know, like character building as well, you know. But within that, you got like Bill George, one of the top model makers in the world, who also won an Oscar, and I worked with him on Star Tours. There's like Pablo Hellman, that he worked on so many like he like supervised the like Attack of the Clones and a lot of the Star Wars films. He did that the one with Jake Gyllenhaal in the desert as the part of he's the
Prince of Persia?
No, the one where he's a soldier in Jarhead. So yeah, stuff like that.
Film.
Like, but just like creating those oil fires. You know, like where you would
that is a wicked scene. I forgot about that.
Take it for granted that those fires were there, but all they had were these giant orange lights, and all of the flame was put in post-production.
I never even thought about that.
Yeah, but like David Vickery, but like David Vickery and like Tim Alexander, who I worked with on Jurassic World, he had worked on like the Lone Ranger and like just beautiful work in that, and then. David Vickery had done like the Mission Impossible, one of the Mission Impossible movies, and then he worked on like Fallen Kingdom, and you know, we were getting a chance to work with a gentleman named Neil Scanlon, and Neil Scanlon created all of the puppets and animatronics that we dealt with on Fallen Kingdom. So you're not just dealing with replacements of you're dealing with these actual shots where there's the dinosaurs are performing, where you've got 10 puppeteers working together to create, like either it's like the raptor on the having surgery done to it, and there was 10 of us underneath the table pressing buttons and levers, and it was.
I'd love to see those behind the scenes.
Oh, it was so
photos.
much fun.
Oh my god!
And but they they created like a full size T-Rex because Juan Antonio Bayona wanted to see that. He wanted the actors to be able to touch it and get on it, and that sort of is called for in the script. You know, like you let that be your guide. If a dinosaur is running 40 miles an hour, you know, the CG is going to take over. But if you have a T-Rex, you know, in a container,
Touch and feel,
and you're touching and feeling it, it works perfect to have, you know, to go ahead and build it. So and Neil Scanlon creates all of the aliens for the new Star Wars films. And there's a fabricator and painter that he works with named Henrik Svensson, who just is super fast. Like the paint work he does on these photorealistic dinosaurs, he gets it done in a few days.
Oh my goodness.
And he's just going into the fabrication room and like seeing these full-size dinosaurs with all the detail that he puts into the scales is just incredible. So.
I want them all in my living room.
I know. Yeah, it was... they're incredibly talented.
So speaking of touch and feeling and bringing things home, someone would like to know if you could grab one thing from the Lucas archives, what would you make off with?
Oh my God, that's a great question.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, right.
If I could make off with one thing, I have to. There were certain
size not being an issue, right? So.
Yeah, I guess the Millennium Falcon, the Millennium Falcon, or the Shuttle Tydirium.
Yeah.
Because I remember I saw the commercial for Return of the Jedi, where you see this ship flying away from camera over Endor, and it was just like the craziest design I've ever seen. It was like shaped like a fish. It had a dorsal fin and pectoral fins, and then they fold. And I just thought the design of that was so different from anything we'd seen before. So I always loved that design. But the Millennium Falcon, just from a nostalgic point of view, it was at the O2 Museum. It was right. What was fun is at the old ILM, you could walk across the street to the model shop, and I would just go and get inspired. And a lot of the sort of like a traveling tour of a lot of the models, they would go to the various museums and then come back. And in case there needed to be some repair work done on them, that's where the repair would be done. And one of the original model makers, Paul Houston, was working on like the Super Star Destroyer. And he had it flipped over and he was working on the underside of it. And I was just like watching him going, well, there it is. That's it. That's
just on your lunch break eating a ham sandwich being like, so Paul.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's just kind of looking at me like, and you are. But you know what? Super Star Destroyer. I probably want to take that too. But the thing's like 10 feet long. So it's not something you could tuck under your shirt, under your vest. But the
who needs a kitchen?
Yeah, but
SDS room.
But you get great stories from Paul Houston as far as like the fabricating of the models, and you realize how I know that they were saying they were putting so much detail into the Millennium Falcon that they were taking a really long time, and John Dykstra came along and was saying like, "What, you guys are still working on this? Come on, you got to get it done." He goes, you gotta, just take some parts and glue gun them down and, just kind of do that. Okay, well that doesn't look good. And he would like rip it off and, keep doing what you're doing, But it's you realize how important it is to not only do something of high quality, but do it fast. And that's, in filmmaking, it's all about that always equals out into money spent. So you realize how quick you have to be to turn the work around in a timely manner. So it's trying to be creative, but being creative on a deadline. That's always been the challenge.
Yeah, that can be a blessing and a curse, depending on.
Yeah, for sure.
But this relates to another question we had. Someone was asking what it's like to work at ILM with the Lucas archive nearby. Like, how often do you get to is it all just work, or do you kind of get to step out and experience the magic?
At the old Industrial Light and Magic, the model shop was across the street. That's not the case anymore. The archives are not. I was very, very lucky to be able to get the opportunity to go there and like photograph some of the models for Star Tours. That usually isn't the case. But what I'm really hopeful about and what's really exciting is George's new museum that he's going to be opening in a couple of years, and then you're going to get everyone's going to get a chance to see these models that just you look at the archives and you see how much beautiful work there is in there. From the Lucasfilm movies, and you think it's like, wow, this is such a shame that no one is seeing this and getting a chance to appreciate this. Like not only the models and the costumes and the masks and the matte paintings, but George's collection of Norman Rockwell paintings, George's collection of Drew Struzan paintings. I'm hopeful that that will all be on display as well, where I think it's going to be an incredible museum. Like, he's never not done everything to the top quality every time he does it. So what's exciting is that people who've always wanted to see the archives are going to be able to when that museum opens. So
it'll be an amazing
that's going to be incredible.
Yeah, I can't wait. So
I have a fan here who's wondering what it was like to work on the Ready Player One movie. Especially, did you have a lot of fun with all the? I mean, that's chock full of pop.
Ready Player One is essentially a 2-hour Easter egg, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It was. David Shirk was the animation supervisor. I was doing previs for that, and before starting in on Fallen Kingdom, and it was an incredible experience. And I love The Shining, and so it was amazing because of that.
Oh, yes.
But I got the opportunity to work on the previs for the dance sequence, and so we had to follow Saturday Night Fever, and so when they start playing that music by the Bee Gees, and so I had footage up from Saturday Night Fever where they're dancing to those specific footsteps. Mm-hmm. But then David looked at it and he's like, well, yeah, but they're in zero gravity. They've got to be floating. So you're trying to create the essence of what they're doing in the movie, that dance. But on top of that, they're also floating. And so and the tricky part of that is
for reference for something like that.
Well, the tricky part of that is like when you do a dance, like when your foot hits the ground, it defines a specific way you move.
Yeah, it moves up the body.
Yeah, and on top, dancers are so good at movement. So you're trying to take inspiration from that, but then you realize, well, they're not doing that. They're spinning and flying, and so trying to take the essence of that dance, the character of that dance, and put it into something in zero gravity was really challenging, but a lot of fun.
Successful.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Beautiful scene too.
Yeah, it was And then again, that again was sort of like the art direction, like and then you'd see all the characters in the background if you're really paying attention, like who's watching the dance. That was a lot of fun when we got to sort of see the finished renders. Just how many characters were in the background that they were loading it up with. It was a really fun movie to be part of.
Have you both read that book? Did you get a chance to read that?
No.
book?
So
I read the book. It was
It's a good
great.
book.
Yeah.
I mean, I read the book, and then when I heard the movie was coming out, I just lost it. I was
is the
so
movie
excited.
a lot different or?
No, I'd say it's just a little bit shorter. Like it's less involved than the book is, but they did a pretty good job. I think as far as that goes. What I love in particular about that scene that you're talking about, the dance scene. Oh man, sorry. That's like the moment in the movie and in the book when things sort of start to take off, really. You know, it's like that's the big, like, here we go into this whole thing is about to unravel. And it's such like a soft moment that's then just really like starkly contrasted by the people that are hunting them, like merging into there. And it's just a really nice contrast and to see visually laid out like that.
I loved how dynamic it was in the end with like the battle sequence with all of the different characters fighting, and I can't imagine. There's like certain shots where I'm trying to just from a technical point of view, I'm like looking at it, trying to imagine how long like one frame took to render, with just the thousands of characters running at each other. So that was really fun to see. So that's when you work in the industry, and then you're trying to sort of detach yourself from not thinking about the technical part of it and just appreciating like, wow, that's a beautiful shot. That looks amazing. And but every once in a while you sort of like,
kind of separate the two.
It's hard to separate the two. You start looking at it going, oh my God, I wonder how long that took. So
that book was certainly a challenge to adapt into a film. Are there any other, do you have favorite books or comic books that you'd love to see the film industry tackle?
Well, what I remember when I was younger, people saying, well, you'll never see a Fantastic Four movie because that's 4 visual effects going on at the same time. 4. And now you've got a Infinity War, and you've got dozens of superheroes
more
that
than
are
you can count.
Yeah, and they're all in frame at the same time. So the technology has gotten to a point now where you can do that. So I remember reading Secret Wars. I would love to see Secret Wars, but I'm sure there's other stories that they have in mind that are. I would love for Marvel to get back that staple of Fantastic Four characters, because then I think you get back Galactus and the Heralds and Terrax and Silver Surfer and Nova and all that fun and then with that all of the Annihilus and all of those cool villains. So I'll be curious to see where things go in the future. So
I know Bree and I are waiting for a King Killer Chronicle series or movie.
Yes.
Have you ever read those?
No.
Oh, if you like Lord of the Rings, you should pick up this.
They're making a prequel series about that. Yeah, and Patrick Rothfuss is set to help produce, I believe. Forgive me.
Is this the one that's set in the Lord of the Rings?
No.
In Middle Earth, or is that the one?
It's a separate mythology.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's a really great. You want to tell us a little bit about it? Maybe Brie will get this on your reading list next.
The story is basically there's a man. You can't really call him old, but he takes on the persona of being old.
Seasoned warrior, right?
Yeah, but he's really not as old as he claims he is. And he runs an inn.
It's not the years, it's the miles. Sorry.
No, you're fine. It's hard to explain, I suppose. But the years have kind of gone by, and a writer, a chronicler, comes into the inn one night and recognizes the man for who he really is, and convinces him to tell his life story. And so he embarks on the story of how he grew up and became this sort of famed warrior that's disappeared, and now he's in hiding. Right?
Oh, cool.
So it's a very...
And is it a series of books, or is it just like the one?
This is the tragedy.
It's very upsetting. There are...
I'm sorry.
There are 2 books, and there's one novella. And there's meant to be a third, and those of us that are fans have been waiting for the third for 8 or 9 years now.
Oh, wow.
It's horrific. No, so I started reading
if Project Rothfuss is watching,
please finish your series.
Please.
I've been reading the Dark Tower series recently.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, many years passed, and Stephen King wrote this great preface where he was like, it took him a long time to finish that series, and he said he had fans writing to him that were like, please just tell me how it ends before I die. And I was like, oh my God, is this going to be my King Killer Chronicle? Probably years from now, just finish it, please.
I finished the second one already knowing what I was gearing up for, and I remember finishing the second one and just being like, what am I gonna do now?
Well, it's like the Avatar films. They're so in such long development time, but I've never seen a James Cameron film that I've ever been disappointed by. Everyone has ever sort of said oh, Titanic, yeah, whatever. Oh, Avatar, yeah, whatever, and it's always blown people away. So I'm curious to see what those movies are going to look like. So
quality is worth waiting for.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few films where you can say the sequel is as good or better than the original, like Godfather 2, Aliens. Aliens, I think, is better. It's a different type of movie. Alien is more of a horror film. Aliens is more of an action film. But it holds its own as being right up there with Alien. I think there's very few films that can say Empire Strikes Back. I would say is different from Star Wars. Star Wars was more epic. Empire just took all of these heroic characters and plunged them into even more darker despair, which I thought, but as far as sequels, even the director's cut of Aliens, I just think is just a masterpiece. So it's it's
Blade Runner. It's up there.
Yeah, Blade. So.
All right. Well, we're running out of time, but I have a great question for us to end on.
Okay.
What's your favorite movie monster? There's so many to pick from, I know, and we were just talking out in the hallway about your love of classic films, and so I think that's maybe if you pick top three.
Top three.
Hard to pick just one.
I'd say Bruce from Jaws. That's even though he's not really a monster, he's monstrous, and I think Jaws is a little bit more of a horror movie than people give it credit for. If you count the number of shocks, jump scares and screams in Jaws,
he eats a little boy.
Yeah, it's pretty, and a dog.
Poor
he eats
dog.
Pipit. I would say that I always loved the Ray Harryhausen films as far as the fact that you've got a design. Something can be a monstrous design and yet it's still appealing. Like the Cyclops from Seventh Voyage of Sinbad is a beautiful design even though it's a monster. The Vermithrax, I think, is an incredible dragon design. But I think probably as far as something that you'd never seen before is the alien from Aliens. And the way it's sort of done similar to the shark in Jaws, it's very peekaboo. You never really get a sense of its anatomy in the movie. We kind of know what it looks like when we see all the amazing sculptures you guys have of its anatomy, but with so lit with just basically just a key light to sort of help define the patterns. But the idea that it didn't have eyes, that just immediately makes it so incredibly alien to what you're used to seeing. And then the mouth inside of a mouth, which is also based on creatures of nature. A moray eel has that, a mouth inside of a mouth.
I didn't know that.
So there's that famous quote from Carl Sagan about life on other planets, which I love, which is someone asked him, what life on other planets is like, and he said, life on other planets isn't more amazing than we can imagine, it's more amazing than we can't imagine. Oh. And I think Mother Nature is the same. If you look at the design in Alien and then you start to look at the deep sea creatures and how scary they are, or some of the creatures that you see in nature, you could see the inspiration for what Alien became. But as far as an iconic movie monster, I had never really seen anything up until that point that was that. And I remember in the documentary Ridley Scott saying, well, now that we've got Giger's design, all these executives were well, now let's go do more artwork. And he's no, you don't need to do anything else. That's it. That's the design.
Yeah, you hit it. You got it.
And they were well, but that's too horrific. And they're yeah, no, that's the point. That's why it's so cool. But when you do look at Giger's artwork, it is horrific looking. But I thought it was so great that he had latched onto it. Went, we don't need to change a thing. That's the monster. So that was. But that being said, I love John Carpenter's The Thing and how the monster always changed. Like it was never one thing. It was always something different depending on which person it
or animal
or animal it copied. So
never look at huskies the same way again.
Right. So there's so much work by like Rick Baker and Rob Bottin, and that is just amazing. And I see a lot of inspiration from it in the halls here. So, but it's really fun to see to get inspired by the work I see on your walls. So I wish my home looked as cool as the stuff you have in your display areas, but I'm working on it.
Well, I can't tell you how incredible it is for the team here to hear you say that you're inspired by our work.
Totally.
Because I feel like
the Predator! I forgot the Predator! Oh no! Oh my God! I've got like 8 Predators in my house. I didn't mention the Predator. Predator's great too. Okay, but anyway, thank you.
So it was Bruce the Shark, Predator, and Alien. That was your top 3?
Yeah, my top 3 turned into like a top 10.
3.5 there.
Yeah, I think I cheated there and named it 20, but I can't help it. So.
But I just want to say thank you on behalf of Sideshow and everyone here. I mean, really, I'll take a page from Sagan's book for bringing us stuff that we couldn't imagine. And thank you for sharing your time with us. We're looking forward to see what you work on next.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This is an honor and a privilege to be here. And
we're so happy to have you.
It's such a real treat to finally see Sideshow and to talk to all of you and to talk to the fans.
The honor is ours.
Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Don't forget to let your geek side show.
Do you enjoy Look Who Showed Up? We are proud to bring you pop culture content completely ad-free, but that doesn't mean we don't need your support to help keep us going. Please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform and help spread the word about our podcast. We welcome fan feedback. Email us at podcast@sideshow.com with your thoughts and suggestions for how we can make our shows even better. Plus, tune in for our other pop culture podcasts. See your favorite common film characters evolve across 2 generations in the bi-weekly Then and Now podcast. Find out if your fan favorites make the cut in the Geek Culture Countdown, a bi-weekly podcast featuring pop culture top 10 lists. Then get all the latest pop culture news with our daily briefing, a 2-minute breakdown of the biggest geek headlines perfect for your Alexa or Google News briefings. We wouldn't exist without your continued support. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show.